We come now to the start of Act 3 of Hamlet. This immediately follows the moment when Hamlet has decided on at least a course of action, if not the course of action. The play is the thing with which to catch the conscience of the king. Now, in doing that, he has at least decided on what you might call a displacement activity. That is to say, he needs to verify whether or not the visitation he's had really is his father and really is indicating the crime of the king. Now, this puts us soundly now in what Graham Bradshaw would consider to be the second movement of Hamlet. If you divide it into three, the second movement, the kind of torso of the play, begins with the arrival of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, the play within the play, and ends with the death of Polonius and Hamlet's subsequent exile. Still, as ever, we're taking the temperature not only of Hamlet but also his world. And in the bit we're going to look at, the run-up to be or not to be, we are confronted with his world. To make a general point about that, an overview statement, I would say that here we have a lot of deceit, a lot of glimpses of the corruption of the court. After all, this sets up the surveillance system that is going to eavesdrop on Hamlet's most intimate moment, the to be or not to be soliloquy. And in doing that, we need quite a lot of subterfuge, quite a lot of dissembling. So that idea that our words and actions don't match our intents or what's in our hearts is, if you can say that's an idea that's on the surface now, it's certainly one that we need to look out for. To start with the situation and the momentum of it, Hamlet is under surveillance because he's becoming increasingly dangerous. To use the language of sectioning, he's not only a danger to himself. Remember, the king has said that he is so far from the understanding of himself. He's not just a danger to himself, but also to others, so that the king is now able to articulate his own fears of what could happen. Strangely, he's penetrated Hamlet's antic disposition, or at least he knows that he should be afraid of it rather than to be taken in by its kind of wackiness. So that's one level of almost inadvertent accuracy and perception, but that actually draws attention to the facade that Hamlet is putting on. There's other deceit here, and I want to draw attention to two examples of it. One is we do see Rosencrantz and Guildenstern here, who you might think are bumbling around, but do remember later on, Hamlet confides in his mother and says that I do trust them like a viper fanged. They are not trustworthy. They are the instruments of the court. Now, here it's worth bearing in mind Tom Stoppard's representation of them as the kind of innocent nebbishes or nudniks who get caught up in the machinery of the court. Indeed, Hamlet has a rather unappealing image where the king seems to eat them up, but park them in the kind of corner of his mouth, the side of his mouth, to swallow them later because they're such a tasty little morsel, such a snack. Now, actually, there are glimpses here that they not only kiss arse, but they cover their own arses. And we see this with what strikes me, at least, as being an out-and-out lie. The Queen's asking, did he receive you well? She's quite slyly, indirectly asking after them. And Rosencrantz is saying, most like a gentleman. He then goes on to say, niggard of question here, but of our demands most free in his reply. By saying that, he's saying he didn't ask us many questions, but he gave us lots of information in response. Now, that's not true. First of all, they didn't really learn much about his disposition, but also, and Tom Stoppard actually counts this. In his play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern replay this episode as if it were a commentary on a tennis match, and they come to the conclusion that Hamlet's asked something like 17 questions of them, mostly were you sent for, and they've only got 3 back, and even then they weren't very revealing. This leads Rosencrantz to deal with a kind of diversion strategy. Oh, look, there's a rabbit, there's a squirrel, and he says, didn't get much about him. He was very pleased about the play. There's going to be a play. Plays are perhaps a very revealing image of how not to be true to nature, how not to be true to yourself. Or, as we'll see in Hamlet's own thoughts on it, he actually does want the play to hold a mirror, as it were, up to nature. Anyway, that idea of putting on a show comes up twice in the little drum roll, the anticipation of the to be or not to be. And I want us to look at both of those. First of all, there's Polonius here. He is stage directing, really. He's using his daughter as a prop, as a kind of bait, much as we see in the sources. It's very important that the bit that Saxo Grammaticus mentions of a woman ensnaring Amleth somehow finds expression in Shakespeare's play. And here it does. But look at the language that Polonius uses to describe it. Read on this book that show of such an exercise. He doesn't actually expect her to be reading this book. So show is a very visual word. May colour, again, we're to do with appearance, like a kind of blush. May colour your lowliness. Quite revealing that Polonius refers to Ophelia's lowliness. After all, we remember from Laertes saying that Hamlet may not, as unvalued persons do, carve for himself, because he can't walk with so great a tether. And then Polonius, using that first person plural, that inclusive use of the word we are oft to blame in this. It is too much proved, and makes a general case that with devotion's visage and pious action we do sugar the devil himself. He takes this idea to quite a sudden extreme, but it's an extreme that immediately resonates with the king, who has a soliloquy. This is the first aside, really, of somebody who is not Hamlet, the first direct addressing to the audience. And as a result, it's sometimes cut, partly because the king will confess his crimes later on. He says, he compares his own crime to the harlot's cheek. So again, like Hamlet, actually, picking up on that obsession with sex as a kind of impurity, beautied with plastering art, just the lavishness of the painting, the colouring that it takes to decorate a harlot's cheek, and to remove it from the ugliness of the thing that helps it, that massive gap between a harlot's unhealthy-looking face and the painting that is meant to make it look the complete opposite. And he draws attention to the fact that his most painted being another word for made up, as in using cosmetics, he compares that use of makeup to the ugliness of his own deed. Oh, heavy burden. And with that line, he shows himself to be at the absolute heart of the corrupt court and the deceit that it takes to keep it going. Finally, that sets the scene for the kind of surveillance of Hamlet that we're going to see. And as we've hinted, that itself is a kind of deceit that Hamlet's alone, but really isn't.